Hey guys, just doing a quick vid today to show you how to actually feed a domestic worm farm. I've tried with the bigger worm farms to show how to do it, and I think maybe it's confusing people. These are just the Australian type of the Worm Factory 360, for want of a better name, just a multi-level stacking worm farm. The leachate collects in the bottom with the tap. Always say to have a bucket there to catch the leachate rather than letting it store up inside of it. You've got your working trays on top. You always feed in your top tray. Basically, the method I teach is a very safe method. It's called pocket feeding. So basically, we dig a little hole in what's already there. You can see some of the worms there. I've been disturbing these ones a little bit this afternoon, so that's why there's not a ton there. And then in the bottom of that hole, we want to put some dry bedding. This is to absorb the moisture from the food. So newspaper, cardboard. With your newspaper, you don't need a paper shredder. You just basically get the newspaper on the edge like that. I've pre-ripped this because I've only got one hand available. You can see how easy that is to just rip off a heap of newspaper at once, give it a bit of a shake, and then in it goes, right? So we've got our bedding underneath, our new bedding. We don't moisten that because that's to absorb the moisture from the food. We get an amount of food that's a typical amount of food for the size worm farm you've got. We always say they eat their weight in food and the same amount of bedding each week. So I put my food in next, and then I always advise as an insurance policy to use some sort of pH buffer, finely ground eggshells, garden lime, rock dust like zeolite or azomite. The one I use is a 50-50 blend of garden lime and fine zeolite. So just put a little shake on the top like salt and pepper. So you could have used egg cartons, toilet rolls, or the fluted cardboard as well for your bedding under your food. You can also use well-aged grass. I've got some there. Your grass is a little bit more prone in the States to heating up than ours, because ours is a little bit more wiry and dry than some of the grasses you have over there. So just be careful with adding grass to the farm. You don't want to add a ton of it in all over the top, so you don't get an escape zone. So you could also add, and grass is one of those funny things that's sort of bedding, sort of food in between. They do eat their bedding. All bedding is food, but not all food is bedding. So you could put a bit of the grass in there as well, right? And then basically the way I say to do it is to cover it back over with the material that you dug out, because that's a microbe-rich material, and that'll help hide any odours that come out of the rotting food, and also helps keep like fruit fly and house fly and everything else from accessing the food. So we cover the material back over, and then sometimes I'll leave a layer of shredded paper over the top of the farm, sometimes I won't. I hardly ever use a blanket in a domestic type worm farm, like a covering over the bedding. In our temperatures it's just way too hot to be doing that, and it excludes the oxygen from the bedding, so I don't put any of that on in a domestic farm. And that's basically your feeding done. Now the process would be, next weekend what I would do is I would feed up this corner, and then so you do the same process up there, and then you don't feed again until you dig down and you see that all the food that you put in this weekend's gone. So you've got a week's worth of food in there that's 2 weeks old, or up to 2 weeks old, and then you've got your fresh food, right? So after they've eaten this first lot here, they'll be getting into that second lot. So next weekend, if they've eaten this first lot, then we put a third lot in. So then I'd probably come up this end of the farm here and put a third lot in that corner. And then the next weekend, when I see that they've eaten the stuff that I put in the second time, then I'll put stuff up here as the fourth time. You can also then, you can feed on the spots on a 6 dice sort of thing. So you could feed here, you could feed here. The idea of moving the feed around is so that the juices aren't in the bedding all in the same position all the time, leaching through. We don't want that leaching of moisture or food through the bedding. We want to contain that up where the worms can actually access it in the working tray. So that's about it for feeding, guys. In these domestic farms you hardly ever need to put water in, just depends on your climate. If you're in a really dry climate, you might need to, and then your options are the bedding that we put under the food. You could moisten that a little bit first, or you could get a watering can and give the top of it a little bit of a wet down. If you're in a really dry climate but it's not hot, then that's when you can use a blanket, like an old piece of cardboard or burlap. We call it hessian in Australia, a burlap bag over the top there with a bit of moisture from a watering can over the top, and that'll help keep the moisture in the worm farm, but it will also help keep the heat in there as well. The only other thing I do differently from some people, I advise when you first set up a worm farm, like if it's got 3 levels, it is to put the bedding, and you'll see this in the how to set up a multi-level worm farm video that I've got there on YouTube, is to put bedding in all of the trays and then still feed in your top tray on top of several inches of bedding. What that does is it allows the worms to escape away from the top tray in bad conditions like hot, even cold. It'll help them, or if there's a bit too much food in there. And how you judge your food is when you can increase your feedings. If the food that you put in this week takes 3 weeks to go, you know you've fed too much, so you cut back your feedings a little bit. Or if you only want to feed every 10 days, you can put the same amount in, but you can't keep adding food when the last 2 lots of food are still there, is the basic premise that I describe. So there you go, that's how you feed a domestic multi-level worm farm. Thanks so much for watching my videos.